Hi, welcome back to another episode of Analyze Scripts. My name is Dr. Katrina Fury, and I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host Portia Pendleton, a licensed clinical social worker. And today we are super excited because we also have Dr. Jessi Gold joining us to discuss season 1 of Yellowjackets, the hit show on Showtime. A couple episodes of season 2 have already started rolling out, but we're going to focus on season 1 today because there's a lot to talk about. Before we welcome our guest, I just wanted to give a little bio. And I feel very strongly about reading people's full biographies, especially women. So I'm going to read the whole thing, and I love it. Jessi Gold is an assistant professor and the director of wellness, engagement, and outreach in the Department of Psychiatry at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. She's a nationally recognized expert on healthcare worker mental health and burnout, particularly during the pandemic, college mental health, using social media and media for mental health advocacy, and the overlap between pop culture and mental health, including celebrity self-disclosure. She works clinically as an outpatient psychiatrist and sees faculty, staff, hospital employees, and their dependents, particularly their college-age kids. Dr. Gold also writes for the popular press and has been featured in, among others, the New York Times, the Atlantic, InStyle, the Washington Post, Time, and Self. So, no big deal. She is on the Rare Beauty Mental Health Council and the Mental Health Storytelling Initiative, and a co-author of the Mental Health Media Guide, which can be found at mentalhealthmediaguide.com. Dr. Gold is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania with a BA and a master's in anthropology, the Yale School of Medicine, and completed her residency training in adult psychiatry at Stanford University, where she served as chief resident. Again, no big deal. Her website is drjessigold.com, and she can be found at Dr. Jessi Gold, DrJessiGold on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jessi. This is so super cool.
Thanks for reading that thing. I was really hoping everybody would get to hear that also.
I know. If you want to tell us your favorite color or, your deepest, darkest fears, we got all the time in the world.
Can't wait.
So speaking of deepest, darkest fears, this is probably one of mine. Plane crash in the middle of the mountains of Canada in adolescence. I cannot imagine a more frightening, terrifying experience. And Portia here, we're learning that she likes more of the lighthearted things, and I really like the dark and twisty, nasty things.
Yeah.
So I was really worried for you. As I was
know
watching.
You gave me some. You were episode 6, trigger warning this, and I was like, okay. I watched some things on, I skipped over a couple scenes.
Yeah, I was like, you got to watch it in the day with the lights on, hold all your pets. It's a lot, right?
Yeah, it didn't help my plane anxiety, but...
I forgot you have plane anxiety, too. You got to take a beta blocker before you watch these.
Yeah.
It's
fine.
Oh, geez, sorry about that. It's a really interesting show in that, when you try to tell people about it, the one-liner is just horrible. You're like, hey, it's a really great show, I swear. It's about, teenagers who crashed in an airplane and, may or may not become cannibals. And also, you see them as adults, too. And people are like, what do you do in your spare time? And I don't like horror and really dark stuff. I like psychological thrillers that bother me. I like I saw you guys did You. Shows like that. That you kind of have boundaries on what it's gonna show, and you can choose not to watch some of the stuff.
And I think it's just such a fascinating portrayal of how one trauma affects so many people in a different way, and then how you sort of simultaneously see the depiction of their backstories and their future stories and how they all weave in. And it's at the beginning, the things you think are going to happen don't happen.
Yeah, I think Vanessa, the goalie, I liked that we saw a little bit of her backstory with it seems like mom is an alcoholic. She was kind of a caregiver. And then, the trauma of the plane crash. And then she was left in the plane, almost died via fire. And then comes out and is really mad at Jackie and Shauna for kind of leaving her there. So I think even that initial, it's she had a double trauma right at the crash scene, the crash, and then had her friends leave her for dead, and then she survives. And then I think that she does not like Jackie after that.
Right. Yeah. So Vanessa, again, to remind everyone, because there are a lot of characters, is the redhead on the goalie team, and she's Ty's love interest. Van. Oh yeah. Yeah, and I guess
so people know in case they're what do you
mean?
Yeah.
And even you're saying there, we see those traumas like right back to back, but also we see her backstory of her mom
Mhm.
and how she's kind of been left by her mom
Yeah.
in that way. And now here she is like strapped in a plane that's exploding or catching fire. And now she's kind of left again, but somehow gets out. So I think maybe we'll start with a rundown of the main characters.
Sure.
Probably just to like orient ourselves a bit. So Jackie is on the team. She's kind of like the it girl, right? Like she's the pretty one. She's the popular one. She is the boyfriend. And I thought she was the one we saw running naked through the woods originally, who they, sacrifice or something, now I don't know. I don't know who anyone is anymore. And then Shauna, played by Melanie Linsky, is her best friend / frenemy, maybe, unclear. She's the one who ended up having sex with her boyfriend, with Jackie's boyfriend, and getting pregnant. Oh my God.
So season 1 ends off, right? She is still pregnant.
She's still pregnant. Yeah. At some point, the trigger warning I gave you, Portia, was she tried to have like an abortion in the woods. I thought that was really heart-wrenching. I can't even like find a word strong enough. What do you think, Jess? What did you think about all that?
Oh, that part?
Yeah, that part. That little part.
Like starting with.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I get it in a lot of ways. If you don't have food and you are a kid anyway, like what would have your choice been?
Yeah.
The choice in the normal kind of setting, let alone in a setting where you're starving, everyone else is starving, you know nothing about babies or how to have a baby, and you are a baby. And I mean, I get that reaction, and it's almost like you saw something on TV and that's what you do. And so that's what you try to do. Like, that's what it felt like to me. Like, this is what I saw be a thing. So I'm going to try it. And it's almost like just sort of the influence of restrictions and what people learn from that. But, I mean, it's heart-wrenching in a lot of ways. It's also just shows like how scary it must be to be in that position as a kid, like anyway, let alone like after a plane crash in like the wilderness, right?
I know.
So I think it's a lot of trauma and a lot of vulnerability, and it like comes to a head a bit there. But I mean, I think it shows also how they support each other.
Right.
You didn't introduce Thaisa, but she's there.
Right. Exactly. And that dynamic between Thaisa and Shauna, I feel like, again, in like their adolescence and now in adulthood, as they're coming back together, just thinking like that they were there together through these awful, horrible things. And when Ty like really is showing up for her in that way, I just thought was like really, really intense. And just a really interesting way to see how the characters' relationships develop over time. And with Ty like keeping that secret for as long as she could, like about the pregnancy and things like that. So Thais is another main character.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked, I guess, at the end, which I don't want to just skip all over her other scenes, but like how it really did in fact impact her, like eating the dirt.
Yes.
Her sleepwalking, her family situation, kind of like after the crash, her son, so we think is like the problem.
Right.
Or having some reaction to his mom, clearly. And then her like political run, and then all of a sudden, trying to jump back into the media. And it seems like all the other characters are like, we planned and we promised that we wouldn't do this. We were going to stay kind of under the radar, and here you are doing like a Senate run.
Right.
But I feel like I like her character a lot as a teen. I feel like she's really strong. I just saw like a lot of resilience with her through everything, like trying to go out and lead them to like find help, knowing that it was probably like a death sentence, but she was going to risk it before the animal attack. And then her relationship with Van is really sweet. Like I feel like there's some sweet moments that come out with her and her family, and then with Van kind of back and forth, which was nice. In kind of
the whole
conflict
context
with then the trauma and it being, really terrifying.
I don't feel like we got a lot of her backstory pre-crash.
I don't think so.
Did we hear a lot of? I don't think we really got a lot about.
If I remember correctly, her parents were kind of supportive. Like they were there, they said bye. Like there wasn't anything anything that we saw that was particularly, traumatic in a Natalie kind of way. Where, I think some of the backstories are there to show that like sometimes the resilience comes from previous history and previous trauma, but or like, you never know what people are coming in with. And I think that that's important. Like, we can have the same trauma affect everybody, but like whatever your history is, it might affect you differently.
100%. And we see a lot of her family in the present day, like with her wife and their son. And I think touching on her sexuality, with Van being a teen in the 90s on an all-girls soccer team, how she was like very reluctant to be open at first and then got more comfortable. I thought that was a really interesting storyline too, and how she, again, really showed up for Shauna, like when she really, really needed her. I think with her character in particular, all the snippets along the way of like, she's running for Senate, I think.
I think it's state Senate.
State Senate. And then the stuff with her son. Like at first I thought like, oh, something's up with her son. And then as things unfolded, it was like, oh, she's the lady in the tree. He's not seeing things. Like I thought, oh, does he have some sort of like early onset psychosis, or is he stressed, or what's like his full story? And then I thought the show's depiction of his evaluation with like the two-way mirror, that was him, right? Was really good. I think overall, like I think the two-way mirrors and stuff, I don't know about at WashU, like at Yale, we didn't have that, but I know at Duke, when I interviewed, they did stuff like that for family therapy. So I know they do that. And I think it was actually a pretty good depiction of that. And I always love when I see accurate and well-rounded and positive depictions of therapy in the media, because so many times they are terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like you're concerned about your kid. You come together to figure it out. Like it's important enough to you. You can see that like there's some tension about who it's more important to, which I'm sure comes out at Stanford. When we learned outpatient, we even did it behind a two-way beer thing, and the patients knew we'd like come out and talk to people and go back in. But, it's interesting from the family side to also have the family behind and giving feedback where allowed, because I think people tell their own stories and kids tell their own stories. And I think it helps to have like context or see even family reactions to things when people are talking. But, I think in a lot of ways too, like it wouldn't be surprising if their kid had issues and the mom was like, there's all this data, even like, let's say, extreme example comes to my head, like Holocaust parents, like parents who survived the Holocaust. There's a lot of like restriction and limits and trauma exposed to the next generation as a result. And like, that doesn't surprise me if you had something like that like a kid could struggle 100% in that setting either, right? Like, it makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So you're kind of like, okay, like, I get where that's coming. Like, it wasn't like surprising that the kid could be dark and struggling.
100%, right?
Yeah.
Look what happened to the mom.
Right.
Like, of course there's something there. And like,
actually, it still is the mom. Yeah. We had a fellow Yale psych grad, Christine Arredondo, on a couple episodes back to talk about Encanto and like the very different movie from this show. But
totally regular segue.
Totally different vibe. But, talking about that like intergenerational trauma, like how the first trauma kind of trickles down in generations. At first, as we were watching Thaisa and her family in present day, I was thinking like, is that just like you're saying, Jessi, like, of course he might have some stuff going on, and she's like running for Senate, and he comes from a home with two moms. It sounds like maybe he had switched schools. Now he's in public school. Like there's a lot going on. I didn't see coming that it was going to be like Thaisa doing all these things, sleepwalking. But then as they connected that to what happened to her, like in the woods, sleepwalking, and, when Van and her would like tie themselves together and she would like bite her and all these things, I was like, oh, okay, now I see it. But it's really sad to see, that kind of unraveling of her family. The moment where she asked Simone, to go stay with her mom. And she was like really pleading with her, like, you don't understand. I could really hurt you. That really broke my heart. But I thought was like really genuine and authentic. And I don't even think she's aware of like everything she's capable of. Like, I don't think she remembers that place in the basement with like the dog head and all the stuff, right? I would say like I don't often see things like that with PTSD. I feel like that's a very severe depiction of it. I guess it could happen.
Your trauma is just so severe. And it seems like they have not really talked about it with people because it's not safe to. Like, everyone wants something from them.
They just want to know, like, did you eat each other?
Right. And it seems when we meet them as adults, like, they're not really close. Like, I think some of them talk, or I know that Thaisa had paid for Natalie's, like, rehabs. But it sounds like they're not, like, friends.
Right.
And they so desperately need to. I mean, Shauna finally tells her husband some of the details, and it's just like he has no idea. So I mean, I think, gosh, like it's not even like they processed
at all. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like an extreme dissociation, I suppose. Sleep does all sorts of weird things in itself with trauma and like safety and not wanting to be asleep because you're not safe and all of that. So I guess some of that is possible. There's like a mystical aspect of the show too, but I think inherently like the not processing is going to be a reason for the dissociation, like whether the portrayal is like super extreme, which it is. Like, I've never had a patient like kill their dog, but like
and create like a shrine.
I've also never had a patient who was like surviving in the wilderness and eating people, so I don't know what that like really does to someone, like from a patient, like from having heard a story that was similar. So I guess it's definitely extreme, but there's some elements of possibility in there that makes sense. And I think like I'm hoping at some point they show us that they forced them into therapy at least a little, and that they all just didn't say anything because they didn't want to get in trouble for like probably what they thought was like a crime. At some point they like actually hunt people and so at some point they killed people. That's a crime. So I sort of wonder, like, if you find them, you're gonna probably get them into some, like, you couldn't have just,
you would hope, right?
80s, 90s, like I don't know, maybe that wasn't a thing and you wouldn't have forced them, but like it seems weird you wouldn't have had them go to like one session, maybe.
Or even in the hospital. Like, I'm assuming that when they were finally rescued, they were, all evaluated, all taken to the hospital, all given IV fluids and kind of checked out. And also I would, hope that there was a psychiatrist coming in and being like, hey,
but I just think like, like,
it seems like you've had a lot going on. Tell me.
But I would think like, how do they trust anyone? Right? Like, I don't even know. I think it'd be really hard for any of them to do therapy. I feel like the one who I would think would maybe jump on is Misty, who I find...
I don't know.
Well, I think she'd do it like for attention.
Okay.
Like I think she would like feeling connected to someone who wants to listen to her and cares about her.
She's so funny. I just she's one of my favorite characters. Both. Absolutely.
Oh, she terrifies me.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Christina Ricci. Like, hello, Casper. Hello, Now and Then. Like, I love anything. Like, I want to watch her all the time. But she like destroyed that box thing, the signal thing.
She watches the rat in the pool or the mouse, struggling. That's pre-crash. So.
I know, Portia. What do you think, Jessi? Are you terrified or?
I mean, I wonder if anyone ever figures out she destroyed the box. Like, I'm guessing never, because they talked to her, right?
Again.
I would, like, people died because of her, so there's no way, right?
They can't have. And I was confused about that folder thing that she has all the information in the woods.
Oh.
She keeps it in the trunk.
She just, she doesn't want them to be discovered.
And why do you have that?
I don't know.
It's because she's like popular there. Right?
Exactly. That's what I mean.
She has like skills that people want there.
Right.
And, like, on the team, she's like the
water girl
manager, water girl person who's just there. Whereas like in the wilderness, she can like help. And I think like feeling needed and wanted is something important to her. Whether there's like some kind of actual like severe pathology there that's like dangerous is one thing. But I also think it's just like a desire to be liked and making rash decisions as a result, like including destroying the box because maybe she thought people would find them eventually and it would just give them a couple more days together or something. Like, I doubt she was like, I bet we're screwed forever now. But I think in the moment she was like, I like this and I like being needed and like I'd like to keep being needed. So let's just have that stay, you know?
But then she like tries to poison the guy who loses his leg.
Ben.
I just think she might be a sociopath. You know,
she definitely is demonstrating some traits.
Yeah,
and
at least two traits. And then she kidnaps the like reporter lady and ties her up, right?
Yeah.
But she's also really defending her own, right? So like it's again like she's protective of her people and their story and what she, you know, so she's the reporter is kidnapped to help them in her mind. I'm not saying it's like healthy, but I'm saying that the decision to do that was like to protect her friends. Like she wants to protect Natalie.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that she sees like where she's stronger in some aspects than they have been. And I think like their story, she tries really hard to protect. So I don't know. I mean, I think that there's like definitely some problems going on up there and like that she definitely kills kind of easily or like chops legs easily and things like that. Right. But in the same respect, like she has like a defense of people she cares about. That's nice in like that setting. Like not that I'd want someone to kill for me, but it's nice to know like
if you needed it, you could call her, I guess.
If she really means that, she'd be there, right? Like I don't know.
Yeah, she's there through thick and thin.
Yeah.
You know?
And in like the setting is so unusual, right? It's so like not a societal norm that it's like it's interesting like who does well in that setting
right,
and
exactly.
who doesn't. Like Jackie feels very normal teen and like she has like a really hard time. Like she's popular in like a traditional high school setting.
But like not
and
in
then
the
falls
woods.
apart in the woods. And Misty is not popular in a high school setting and then kind of like
really
is
needed.
really helpful and shows up for people in the woods and obviously still does some questionable things. But I think that's just interesting because like within our society, like some of these people don't fit in and have like these antisocial traits, but
then it turns out it's really like useful when you're starving in the woods.
I do agree though that like the social hierarchy bending is interesting, right? And I think it's one of the things that makes it kind of like cool that it's that population of like teen girls because you're like teen girls are mean girls and there's bullying and there's reasons people are cool, like they're dating the popular guy and they're pretty and they put out, I don't know, right? These like things that are like admired as characteristics in a person who's popular, but then when they go to the wilderness, that person has like zero skill set and actually annoys them,
right?
Because they can't do anything, right? Like they're like, you're utterly useless here. Like, we don't need a cheerleader. And like at times, like that helps them, right? To have like the support and care. But like a team captain for a soccer team is not the same as a team captain for a soccer team that needs to survive, right? So like that upending, I think is really cool.
I think it's just like, of course, that she goes for Ben and then, you know, he turns out he's gay and he kind of like is so afraid of her. It seems like that he's like willing to, you know, go to her pretend
the prom.
that they're in this like secret relationship or that, you know, like he plays into this, you know, fantasy.
Well, yeah,
of her
she did
so
chop off his leg. Yeah.
Like kill him.
Like, and poison him again. Yeah, and again, it's the 90s, so you think about, again, both we see Ty and Ben with their sexuality and struggling, like how open to be. And again, maybe the wilderness when you're starving, like, isn't the time to come out for Ben. You know, it's hard. Yeah. It's hard.
But I feel like for Ty, it's like safe and protected.
Yes.
Like they're all together and like she wants to be loved by someone and like loving someone is protective against all of the bad stuff. And like, I don't know. I think that story, like the Van and Ty thing is sort of like really bad things happen, but you can still have together and dance with somebody. Like, and, you know, like emotions are weird and mixed and don't all have to be bad at once. And like sometimes you need those like little moments of win to like keep going.
Right.
And I don't know. I think that like for them, it was like, whatever, like we're stuck here and we love each other and
might as well.
If this is the last time we see each other, like we might as well. And I think it was safe. Like,
Right.
a lot of that stuff ends up being kind of like a safe place for them.
Yeah. And again, it's interesting how they depict that being a safe place and like a really sweet storyline and theme to carry through when there's so little sweet storylines, right? But then for Ben, the coach, how it didn't feel safe for a really long time until it kind of felt like he had no other choice.
And
was
he
like-
discloses to Natalie, which I
Mhm.
think
They have a nice
yeah,
bond,
yeah.
I thought.
yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if it's just like in a way, like who's the assistant coach too, right? Like
I think so.
I think it's like he was like left to take care of all of them, and he's not that old. Like,
Right.
I know.
He's probably
supposed
like
to be
19 or something.
Just graduated college or still in college kind of age. Like he's not supposed to be the one helping people survive while he's barely surviving himself. I can't imagine how much pain that would be.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think we want to talk about Natalie and her character.
There's a lot to talk about with her. First, how did her hair stay blonde in the wilderness for 19 months?
It starts to grow out, I think, towards the end
Like
of
19
season
months
1.
in.
It's like this much. I thought about that too.
Yeah, there were some things like that. I don't think Van would have survived that wolf attack. Like she totally, unfortunately, would have gotten septic, I think. Right? There's just some plot holes, we'll call them, but you know, we can have some creative
There's
license.
a little like fantasy in it.
Yeah, I would like that fantasy
Like,
right on.
I don't think they were like thinking so much about the hair, or I don't know. I mean, Lottie's off medicine.
I know the loxapine
decision about what that is, and we haven't talked about Lottie, but yeah, I think Nat's backstory is the most interesting. I think Natalie probably copes in the way most people don't think they will, but will.
Right, I totally agree.
Using alcohol, being aggressive, like using drugs, like not really wanting connection because they go away.
Right.
Like it's a really common reaction, though. Like most people, I think, would be like, well, of course they won't turn to that. Like that's not me. But like it is if it makes the feelings go away.
Yeah, I mean,
safe.
Yeah, I mean, look at COVID and how high the alcohol rates went up. You know, this totally happens. Natalie was a really fascinating character, I think, all around, and she just got more and more complex. I think, like as the season went on,
almost to me the most like typical reaction. Like, I feel like I wasn't surprised about how she was handling things at all after. Her teen prior crash traumas and then obviously the crash, but I was kind of interested to see where she learned how to shoot the gun, right? So then it kind of flashes forward to her and her dad, who seems abusive, and then she like is pointing the gun at him and like clicks the trigger, and I was like, wow. I mean, that's like, he must be very abusive. I mean, that's a pretty far place to go, and then it doesn't go, and I'm like, now he knows that you are going to shoot him, and
then we see how abusive he is, that he's so insulting, and
and then he falls and shoots his head, and I was like, wow, that is traumatic to see, like gory and wow, trauma.
And I also think it's like the thing she doesn't I'm sure none of them know that.
Right.
Like it would be shocking to me. They probably know her dad's dead.
Yep.
Right. But like that's it. Like I doubt any of them know that. They just are like, oh, she knows how to shoot a gun because they like went hunting or something. Right. Like I don't know. I mean, I think maybe that guy who's like, he's a cop now. Maybe he knew because he was there and kind of had more of a relationship with her.
Right.
But like, I don't know that she would have told any of the people in the wilderness that. Like,
no, I don't think so.
Like, hey, soccer team talk is not like that, probably. Like, I don't know.
I was surprised she was on the soccer team, I have to say.
Yeah, like she's edgy for it. Well, she's actually good, right? Like, I think that could be part of it.
Yeah.
You know, like she actually was like decent at the game. And so it wasn't maybe for her about like the stuff that comes with it as much as like she actually liked the sport, you know?
And it's probably a great way to like get out some aggression, as a teenage girl going through like that and probably so much more at home. And then when she was like at the soccer game with that guy from high school and his kid, and she was like telling him like, you do this move and you do that move. And then he won. I thought that was like really sweet. But I wasn't surprised that she didn't sort of continue with that connection. I think, like you said, Jessi, like connections and closeness feel really scary to her. So I think she's someone who I think craves it, but avoids it. Given like everything she's gone through. And I really am interested to continue seeing and learning more about her relationship with Travis, when they're in the woods and then what happens, like when they all get back.
Yeah. Because that was just also like another person leaving, right? When he's like, we think killed, or the police don't think so, but we think so, that he was murdered. Like that's another huge loss for her.
Oh, 100%. And she has this feeling like that he wouldn't commit suicide. And then we get into that symbol. And I think that kind of brings us also into talking about Lottie, who was like a surprise big deal at the end. Like I was really fascinated at the beginning when they showed that she was on a typical antipsychotic. And I was like, oh no, what is going to happen to her in the wilderness without this? Like, this is not good. And then when she started having these like visions and stuff, it was really interesting to me how how do you frame it? Is it more mystical or is it psychosis? And it's interesting to see how the whole team reacts to it while they're all under duress and desperate for some sort of leader and some help.
And on mushrooms. That's when she kind of becomes this this leader in this, attempt to kill the
Travis.
Yeah.
And
I think it's like when people ask us like if cult leaders have mental illness, right? And I think like probably there are some people that do and some people that don't, and that people who follow cults are not necessarily psychotic either. But I think that there's this like
gray line,
that's like very blurry with that stuff, where like diagnostically they don't necessarily have that, or they have more insight than we would consider someone with psychosis having, or something. But it kind of shows that like blurred line with cults and cult leaders and like psychosis that I think is super interesting, and like this desire for something bigger than them, like almost like religion, right? Which is also where cult kind of comes in, which is like, I need to believe in something to like keep going. And like the thing that they're starting to believe in is like the power of nature and the relationship with nature and nature saving them. And like what Lottie can do is because she can talk to animal, like whatever it is. And it's just sort of like, I need to have a higher power. The higher power just happens to be based in this world of someone who might not be in touch with reality. But like, I also don't think that they know that. Like, I think that they're like, I bet Lottie's off her meds. Like,
100%.
That, right? So
no.
my thought is that's a secret.
Right.
And so she just like, oops.
Ran out. Yeah. NBD.
Right? And nobody's like, doesn't she take medication? Like maybe we should listen to her, which I think would happen in the real, like as bad as that is, right? Like in sort of stigmatizing to sort of like assume that that person is having some sort of mental illness related thing. I think that in the world, if someone knew you were on antipsychotics and then were in the wilderness and not on antipsychotics, they'd say, like, where's that coming from? Like, is it from her head? And like, should we be scared and worried about her as opposed to like following her and assuming that saying is true? But they just wanted something to believe in. I know.
And so I think it just totally speaks to, like how desperate they are, just like you're saying.
And Cam is one of the first ones, I'm sorry, not Cam, Van.
Yes.
Is one of the first ones to really like take an interest in it and kind of also want the seance. And then when they're back, like she just kind of wants to pray over their meal. And I think it's interesting that like Thaisa is really opposed to it, like does it then kind of for Van, but even with just their backgrounds, and this is really like making big assumptions here, but like based on Van's backstory, I feel like it's less surprising that she like really needs something to kind of like anchor her and ground her. And Thaisa is like more able to at this point kind of
have like an
rely on
inner,
herself.
yeah.
But then she does it for Van, which is sweet. But I think that's
Yeah.
I
interesting.
think Van also survived in multiple times she shouldn't.
Oh,
Yes.
When that happens, people get weird.
They
Like,
do.
I don't know, like people turn to like weird mystical stuff, or like there must be some reason I'm alive, right? And
right. Like the laws of probability become magical and mystical. I see this even with people with like, I want to say run-of-the-mill PTSD, like not related to something super severe like the Holocaust or a plane crash like this, but someone who's maybe had like complex childhood dynamics, maybe a parent with an addiction, they're in an abusive relationship, and they got in a car accident or something, like just sort of like a series of things. And they keep surviving or they don't. And it does start to feel like it has this like you're saying, mystical or religious meaning to it. And I think that's part of, the way humans try to process trauma and things that are like hard to make sense of, especially when so many of them happen to you. You start to think like, well, I must be cursed, or there must be someone looking out, or something like that. Does make a lot of sense.
Look for a meaning, right? Like, I mean, you were saying at the beginning too, like she almost like was in the plane when the plane was on fire too, right? So like in a lot of ways, like there are a lot of things with fire for her. And there are a lot of things with like animals. And I think that also goes with like the symbolism of what Lottie's
100%.
ideas very much prey on the things that she survived too. So like it doesn't surprise me that she would be probably the most vulnerable to it. The other person being Laura Lee is like,
Laura Lee.
And so like, the religious person also wants to believe in stuff. It might be different stuff, but she doesn't like say anything weird about the experience of, what Lottie's talking about, because she's like believes in religion pretty strongly herself. So I don't know. I think to me, it's like a logical person to be most convinced when you almost from like crazy stuff multiple times, and like someone stitching her face in your house, and like
I know she's got like barely a scar.
How am I here? And also I am. So like, but next, and we know from like season 2 spoilers that someone was cast as older Van, so we know Van makes it. So I think that like that's also important.
Right. There were a couple people near the end who we found out made it that I didn't think would have, right? Like the whole season I thought it was like this core group of like 4 or 5 girls, and then we learned like, oh no, more of them
I think
do
it's like
make
the last
it.
scene I see them calling a couple more survivors, and I was like, wow, okay, season 2, here we go.
And also you guys were mentioning like they separate, like something happens where they don't want to be around each other anymore, right? And like Thais and Van clearly break up, right? But so I think that it's not surprising we don't see them all in the same stuff, and that the core group was kind of a core group during the time anyway. They're kind of cliquey a little. They were like friends before. They supported each other through it. They pull in some others, but like some of the other ones, like they're like there and big in the wilderness, and maybe just not otherwise. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. And I wonder in season 2 if we'll see more and more of those other girls. I know we see more of Lottie, who's given me like Teal Swan vibes. We'll talk about him more next time. Have you watched that yet, Portia? Okay. Have you seen that, Jessi?
Oh yeah. The first episode?
Or the Teal Swan documentary?
Oh no, I don't think so.
Oh, you got to watch it. You'll love it.
What cult is that?
It's hers. She's called Teal
Just
Swan.
called that? Okay.
It's on Hulu.
It's on Hulu. I had a patient way back in the day, like come to a session in distress because they had a sibling who was like getting all involved in it. And I was like, I don't know who that is. And then fast forward, like last year, there was this documentary out and I was like, oh. But it's very similar to this dynamic. And it, you can see how, I mean, not to spoil the documentary for you, but I will. Basically, Teal Swan like hires this private investigator who is a very nice elderly woman. Interesting choice for a private investigator to like follow them around and investigate and prove they're not a cult. And like it turns out her findings are that they are indeed a cult. And then you see all of Teal Swan's rage and all these reactions and just so many interesting dynamics. It just reminds me a lot of what we might see in season 2.
It reminds me of the show also on Hulu with Nicole Kidman based on that
Big
book.
Little Lies, or
Nine
Perfect Strangers.
It's very similar to that, like a cult leader.
They're all on shrooms too, which is also relevant to this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is like the weird mystical aspect
Right.
of shrooms mixed with psychosis, mixed with not sleeping and not eating and not having normal body temperature regulation. Like,
right. All of it.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
You just are. Like,
And-
it's like a permanent state of mania. Like,
Right.
It just makes sense.
Yeah. And again, I think in the Teal Swan documentary, which is reminding me of this show, you do see like certain types of people are more vulnerable to these types of people like Lottie or like that influence like we're talking about. And I feel like in the show, showing that it was Van and Laura Lee really tracks. You know, like I think in the real world. And it's interesting to me how Natalie is so against it. And it, again, right, like AA and a lot of the treatment we sort of recommend for addiction also has this reliance on a higher power. And I wonder how Natalie feels about that. Probably not great is my assumption.
I mean, you kind of see that right at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's almost like she's going through the motions to get out of there.
Exactly.
And like, you know, she wasn't using or whatever, but she's kind of feels like to me the kind of patient that would go once and be like, this stuff's ridiculous.
Right.
And also figure out a way to quit themselves. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that has enough internal whatever where you're like, you did what? And they're like completely cold turkeyed it and it was fine. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like see that, but I also could see like that probably AA and even group therapy in general might feel like that to her.
Right. Especially after this whole experience.
And because like, you know, the biggest complaint people have with AA is like the higher power part.
100%.
People are always like, it doesn't have to be a spiritual thing. Like it can be whatever a higher power is for you to like try to not scare people away. And there's so much evidence that it works and is helpful for people. But I also think like peer support and group support is not going to work in a group that like had to survive like that and doesn't trust anybody. Like you would think like ultimately the normalization of the experience, et cetera, would be helpful. But unless the group is them, I can't imagine that you go to you go to a group like that and you're like, well, like, you know, I survived a plane crash. Everyone stares at you. Then you're like, I lived there for however many months.
19 months.
Yeah, I lived there for 19 months. They're like, well, what did you do? And then
we had to
curiosity and
like voyeurism.
Support. It's this voyeuristic interest in like what happened and why. And that's why journalists are interested too. But it's not in like healing them. And I think sometimes people think therapists do that too, right? Like where your story is so unique and like original that like when you're telling your therapist, like people watch the reaction and if the reaction or the questions feel like you're like, wait, what? Like what? Like tell me more about that in a way that feels incredulous or feels like you're asking for education on it. Like people don't want to go back to therapy either because like they feel like they're telling their story in the way that you said maybe Misty would like it, right? Like for the attention, for the interest, not for support. And I think it would be hard to find somebody. I mean, there are therapists who like specialize in cults and things like that, but who knows what they did back then. But I do think that it would be hard to find somebody like in a support group with like people who are there doing other stuff to feel support in that sense, because it also ends up like Grief Olympics saying, hey, I'm not going to beat the person who wilderness for 19 months. You're just not.
Right.
And so it makes it a weird dynamic for a group where the group's then like, can I talk about how I'm fighting with my husband? And like, of course you can, because your trauma is your trauma and is valid and your feelings are valid, right? But like, if you're that person who turned to substances to hide how ashamed they were to begin with, and then the person next to you is like, I survived 19 months in the wilderness, you'd be like, I'm out.
Yeah.
You know, like, I don't think I would be able to be like, school's hard. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't like med school. I don't like this and things that have really like stressed me out in my life next to someone like it's just really impossible. And it's not their fault. It's human nature to sort of like compare in that sense. And it would make for a weird group dynamic.
It would.
The same.
Right. Like you said, like I feel like the group would have to be them and like an expert therapist.
I said like, skilled if they're going to see someone. I feel like skilled's not even the right word. Like it needs to be someone who's like not reactive, like, okay, so what emotion was that? And not like, oh, and then what happened?
Yeah.
Because
I think it's like, I think anything you could say could be very easily, like even if you're just like trying to support them. And I'm more animated as a human. I didn't like go to psychoanalytic school of thinking, and I self-disclose and stuff like that. So for me, like I wouldn't necessarily be doing that because I wanted more interestingly, but I think it could come off like that. Or I would do the opposite, which is try really, really, really hard not to. And then it would come off like I was like
flat or something. Yeah.
Not interested, or what they were saying wasn't important or something. Like I don't know that I could handle the middle ground as well. And I think like people probably don't realize that we can say that about certain, it's why we don't see certain patients and why we like certain things, because like I can see like what it would be like to tell someone from the other side that stuff. And if I don't feel like I can handle that appropriately, like you shouldn't waste your story on me. Like,
100%. It's really important.
And, like it would scare them away from therapy. Like, I don't know. Like I can't imagine there's a safe place to land for most people in those circumstances, and probably a lot of them, the place that they land, if they do get care, is not the right one. And then what? Like
I know
they don't want to get help again, and then it's all weirdly repressed and coming out and killing rabbits and stuff, right? And so I think it's a mental health, like we're not perfect at what we do, but I think like when you come in with stigma and beliefs about like what it's going to be like, and then we like eat into it because
that's not great.
It's already in your head or whatever. I think it just makes it worse. So I'm hoping they show a lot of that stuff.
I am too.
But I don't know that they will, but I think that stuff, like at least for me, is like super fascinating, which is like how the heck do you get back to life at all when you have that happen? And like, what does that look like for someone? And I really hope they get into that, because like it's a weird time frame. Like it's not the time frames they're showing.
Right. So in between.
But I hope they do, because at least from a psych perspective, like that's super interesting to me. Because like I don't even know what I would do personally as a psychiatrist in that situation.
Right. I totally agree. I really hope we do see some of that, because they are at least, like Ty, Shauna, Misty, Lottie, I feel like I'm forgetting one. Natalie. They're all functioning in different ways. And it's like, how? Like, how?
Shauna seems like, and I wrote this as a question mark. I don't know if it was true. Was she at the first episode, in her daughter's bedroom, masturbating to her daughter's boyfriend's picture?
I blocked that out.
So I think that she feels very like stuck in her teen, right? She came back and married her, best friend's boyfriend who she had been, hooking up with. She like is attracted to this young boy.
Somewhere.
And does the baby survive? I don't think that baby is her daughter, because the ages don't match up.
Yeah.
But like, what happened?
I know.
Well, like she marries the guy no matter what that trauma was, right?
Right.
So you said, we talked about at the beginning, like her wanting to get rid of it, but like on top of it, like maybe it doesn't survive, maybe it does, who knows? But like what happens with that conversation that leads you to stay with the person too? It's super interesting. Like your baby is like as a person too.
And then the whole
she feels like, we always say like people are stuck when like their trauma happened.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, she feels like that. Like
definitely
evolved beyond that. Like even beyond the weird like daughter's boyfriend thing. When she's dating Adam, the things that she's doing are like
rebellious, right?
Jumping off a cliff, like having a beer at a party,
in the parking lot of a gas station.
Like she's really excited about it, and it feels so exciting and new and whatever, because like
she never got to do it.
A normal childhood and teenage years, so she does feel to me like very stuck in that. But at the same time, like my role is to be mom and housewife, and so I shall make dinner and like kind of go through the motions. But
then I'm going to feed you all rabbit stew.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, I'm very much the same age as my daughter, which is why my daughter doesn't buy my stuff. Like, because like my daughter doesn't think that I should be able to mother her because I can't.
Yeah. I will say it was touching when Sean is talking to Jeff and they're all coming clean to each other. And she realizes that he knew this stuff all along and he stayed. I just thought that was like really touching and really spoke to however dysfunctional their relationship is. I think anyone who goes through a trauma, huge, small, medium, whatever size, however you want to quantify it, just wants to feel like held and accepted and not like shunned. I think we were talking, you were sort of touching on that, Jessi, about like how would they ever function in group therapy with this being their trauma? That I don't know. I thought that was a really sweet moment that she felt like he knew all this about her and yet he didn't run away.
Yeah.
It's very different than Thaisa's relationship. Right? He's somebody different that she met later in life that we don't know a lot about that part. But my guess is like she doesn't know as much as she should because when stuff starts to come up, it's really, really scary to her as opposed to being like, remember when you used to do that? You're doing that again, like, or something like, no, like that would feel like she told her any of that. So I feel like their relationship was built on like that didn't happen. Whereas like, there's some component of the Sean and Jeff thing that was like, we were bonded long before we are bonded by this stuff. We're bonded by Jackie.
I know, the whole like birthday lunch thing with her parents.
Like we're bonded by Jackie. I don't know. And so I think maybe she thought he knew some stuff, but not as much, but they didn't really talk about it. But the unspoken stuff was like enough to help that relationship sort of survive, where like Thaisa's is like just never like never discussed or something. So it's like a very different thing.
Right. And as we're talking, I'm just thinking like Jeff was probably traumatized too. Like he was like still in school, but like he probably has his own stuff that we haven't even seen. Maybe we will someday, but be curious to hear.
There's no way he doesn't. Like, first of all, they have to at some point basically throw them funerals. 19 months? Like at some point you say, we lost the plan. Like they're not coming home. So like, don't you think that like at some point somebody calls it and they like, have some kind of ritual for them? Like I just can't imagine that they don't.
Right. Even like as a school-wide memorial or something.
Right. They have to have something. And I'm sure the school's like not a good situation to be in, let alone like when you date two of the people that are there, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, he was like such a kid, right?
I know.
So yeah, there's no way that was like fine for the people at home. And like it makes you wonder, like, is he supporting Jackie's parents while also in love with Shauna and then not able to say that because it's...
Were they even in love or did they just bone him and Shauna, right? Like they were like teenagers.
It's
complicated. Stay tuned. Yeah, it is complicated, Jessi.
You can't have not trauma
right?
about it.
No, not at all. All of them. Oh my gosh. And then like the whole twist the show takes with like, is Adam somehow involved and, like manipulating Shauna? I was like, yep. Yes, he is. I knew it. And then I was like, oh, turns out he is not. Turns out that was a red herring, And now when Natalie gets kidnapped at the end, I was like, what is going on? Where did this show go? It just really took a turn.
Yeah.
Really.
I need to watch season 1 or season 2, episode 1, like after this.
Really catch up.
It gets dark quick. I think that, some of that is like this, like, impermanence of safety or something like where no matter who's in their life, even if they're happy, it's hard to be happy. So technically Shauna was happy with Adam, but like the second she thought there was something bad about what he was doing or he was hurting her, it was like completely 180 into like being bad and dangerous and no, we can't, I have to protect myself.
Yeah.
And I think that again, I mean, was like very much a trauma reaction. But like, as is the rest of dealing with Adam afterwards. And so,
call your girls.
And
Let's
Misty's
dismember
job,
him.
like, I just think so much is so interesting, like, and how she seems to be, taking medications regularly from where she works. It seems like it's assisted living.
And it also tracks, though, that she would be a PCA, but not rise to a higher level. I think just with her personality type, like without the crash, I think that tracks, and then add in the crash. Right? Don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think she's just doing a job to do a job, and she likes that people are dependent on her.
Yes.
And she's like powerful
they
there.
Need her for meds, and they need her and she can like make them in pain and not in pain. Like there's power in it, and like also lack of accountability in a lot of those situations, right? Where like older people sometimes don't have support, and so like you're in this situation where you kind of have more power than you should, because like there's not enough accountability in those places. And so it doesn't surprise me she found her way to a place like that at all.
And is this like expert online of like detective,
God, like the detective sleuthing,
I just, like,
and her
that.
birds.
Yeah.
I forget the bird's name, but it was great.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
So you have started season 2, but not really, I guess, talking about what you've seen, but what do you want from season 2? Like, where do you want to see it go? What are you interested to see happen? What do you want more of?
I don't know. So like you're watching a show about cannibals. So at some point you wonder where that comes from and what happens to change that and how they get there. At some point you wonder who the person they're chasing is.
Yes.
At the end of the first season, we also know somebody prominent dies. So like you're also curious how they all react around that. And so I think you want to know that. I think you want to know, like, I don't know that I want to watch like, it's so weird because it's like you're watching a show where that's the premise, but it's like, do you really want to watch that? And it's like, not really, it's super uncomfortable to think about, but like, you do want to know how they get there and what happens.
I know,
right?
yeah.
So I think that is something I'm interested in psychologically. I think that, how they get home and stuff like that, I hope we see eventually, but I would assume it's not this season because they already renewed for 3. So at some point they're not going to do that, right? So that's like, rescuing seems very end of show to me, or like close to end of show.
True.
So, how that happens.
We could have a whole season with them trying to do group therapy.
Yeah,
I think
it could go on forever.
It could, yeah. I think it's going to take like a darker, mystical turn, in like Travis's murder. But I would like to see season 3 just devoted to therapy.
Be a lot to talk about.
From a mental health perspective, there's a lot they could do if they wanted, right? And so you hope that some of it's there, because for me watching, I'm like, I think it's really helpful for people to feel seen by these like different characters and their different reactions to the same thing, because we all have that, no matter what that same thing is. Like families reacting to family trauma, like all of us reacting to COVID, like whatever it is, like we all react differently. And I think it helps that like the portrayals of PTSD are not just like
the same
sexual assault and military and flashbacks and hypervigilance, and there's more to it, and that helps people go like, oh, maybe that's what I'm dealing with. But at the same time, from like our side of things, like it'd be really nice if someone actually got treatment. And the very dysfunctional, and that's part of it, but like maybe one of the people on the team isn't.
Maybe Van.
Like, we don't know what Van's doing. We don't know if there's anybody else, right? Like, there could be. So like, where's the coach? Like, there's these people that you wonder where some of these people are, and you're like, did somebody get help? And like, can they model that? Like, that would have been a way to come back from this,
right? A healthy way,
right away. Because I think people get super scared about trauma therapy. Like, I can't relive that whole thing. I just got out of there. Like, you absolutely can't make me keep saying that over and over. Like, they don't want to go to trauma therapy for that reason, and I think that's also important as like a resistance thing to talk about. But you'd hope that like from our side of things, like somewhere they at least discuss why they didn't, or and say like what was going on with people from resistance side and why that's valid, or that sort of thing.
I would love to see that.
When you watch TV as a psychiatrist.
I know, it's so true. It's so true. Yeah. And I also think it's important to put out there that there are forms of trauma therapy where you don't have to rehash the event over and over and over and over. I think you're spot on. A lot of people are really scared to come to therapy because they think that's what they're going to be expected to do. And a lot of times as people are kind of getting more comfortable in therapy, I try to gently talk about how they are reliving it over and over and over, just when they're not wanting to. And somehow that's how the therapy can help. But just to put it out there, you don't always have to like go through your trauma narrative every time. Wow. Jessi, I don't know if I should thank you for having us watch this show. I mean, it's very dark, but it's really enjoyable.
Like, what do you want to talk about? I was like, this is the most mental health interesting show I've watched in a while. And for better or worse, right? Like there's always good and bad things, and there's always things that could be better. And, I'd love people to consult people more so that they were better.
I know. And we are
a lot of things are based in lived experience, and I get it. And we have that same conflict all the time on social media and stuff. So
again, we are so grateful that you spent your time with us today talking about the show. I agree. It was a good watch. Like I inhaled it.
Excellent acting. Excellent cast.
There really isn't a better cast, which is also true. Which is like they did this thing where they're like pulling on your own nostalgia.
Yes, Christina Ricci. Yes,
were just amazing.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, they look exactly.
I know.
Like, the casting was sick. There's not a lot of sometimes you're like, I see it for the young version of someone, but you're like, oh, and they practice mimicking each other's behaviors and think about what would be different in the future versus now. And it's they do that part is phenomenal.
Yeah. Wouldn't you love
more awards for that?
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking I want to be involved in that. If anyone wants to consult us for season 2 or 3, give us a call or I guess DM or whatever the kids do these days.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Do something.
Just send me a carrier pigeon or a smoke signal. Here you go. Well, thank you so much, Jessi. Again, we so appreciate your time. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I look forward to coming back to talk
Oh my God, please. We would love that. Season 2.
And steady, quick on the intensity. If anyone who's listening's already started.
Yeah, I know. Seriously, we would love to have you back. We would love to have you be our Yellowjackets field correspondent. But it's cool to know that there's other psychiatrists and mental health professionals out there who share our love of, the media and wanting to just put out factual info based on these depictions, good and bad.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. And make sure that you also follow Jessi on Instagram and TikTok at
Dr. Jessi
Dr.
Gold.
Jessi. Yep. Dr.
And
Jessi
then follow
Gold.
us at Analyze Scripts. I think we have a TikTok now.
Yeah, we do.
As of yesterday.
All right. Well, thank you. And thanks for tuning in.
And we'll see you next Monday.
Bye.
Bye. This podcast and its contents are a copyright of Analyze Scripts, all rights reserved. Any redistribution or reproduction of part or all of the contents in any form is prohibited. Unless you want to share it with your friends and rate, review, and subscribe, that's fine. All stories and characters discussed are fictional in nature. No identification with actual persons, living or deceased, places, buildings, or products is intended or should be inferred. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The podcast and its contents do not constitute professional, mental health, or medical advice. Listeners might consider consulting a mental health provider if they need assistance with any mental health problems or concerns. As always, please call 911 or go directly to your nearest emergency room for any psychiatric emergencies. Thanks for listening and see you next time.